Friends, we have gathered to remember and to honor the life of Michael Hough, who was born in France, in the city of Nice, on August the 5th, 1928, and lived a long and full and loving life until he died here in Toronto on January 25th of this year. Here we gather in a quiet place, in the company of friends and loved ones, to celebrate a life well lived, to give thanks for the many blessings received and given during 84 years, and to share in a rich treasure chest of memories. We gather to express our sorrow and to comfort and to be present to one another in a time of loss. Yet here we call to mind a word of hope. For we gather also to assert that even in sorrow, the world is beautiful, that life is good, and that even when someone dies, the love that flowed through him does not. Bridget and the family are honored by your presence here today. We're very happy that you're here. We hope that everyone will be able to stay after the service and have a visit in McClure Hall, which you'll find through that doorway. In there's a wonderful photograph loop that Tim has put together. There are paintings of Michael's. There's just all kinds of, as well as sandwiches and squares. And a glass of wine, I believe. So I hope you will be able to stay. It's been marvelous to see the various ways that various people have worked together today for this service. And you will find that the service, although it unfolds in precisely the normal format of a Christian service of memorial, we have been quite careful and tried very hard to find language that Michael himself would have found meaningful. And we hope that everyone here will be able to join in the spirit of the words that we say together. So therefore, in that spirit, let me invite us all to join our hearts in prayer. Holy Mystery, we live and breathe in the embrace of the cosmos from our birth and in every moment of our lives. And we recognize a spirit of kindness that draws near to us in difficulty and in death. Gathered this day, we give thanks for the beauty of life, for the loveliness of this earth, for the wonder of day and night, the miracle of seasons and years. We give thanks for the joy of human life, for the satisfaction of good and meaningful work, for the blessings of intellect and generosity, and for the enchantment of art and music. Our hearts delight in the blessings of human relationship, of families and friendships, neighbors and colleagues. For all this we give thanks, and for this very reason we feel sorrow at the end of a life well lived. We know that death is a part of life, and we give thanks that Michael is now at peace. We feel now the pain of parting, but we rejoice that we were privileged to be part of his life. In our sorrow, may we remember Michael with love, trusting him to the gentle embrace and keeping of the cosmos. Amen. Now Sophie is going to come forward and read a poem.
This is Song for the Ancient Trees by Robert Priest. I am young and want to grow to be old, but I don't want to outlive these trees, this forest, when my last song is gone, for generations to come. Oh, when my last song is gone, I want these same trees to be singing on. Newer, greener songs for generations to come. So let me be old. Let me grow to be ancient, to come as an elder before these same temple green sentinels, with my aged limbs, and still know a wonder that will outlast me. Oh, I want long love, long life. Give me 150 years of luck, but don't let me outlive these trees.
Good afternoon. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Carolyn Woodland, and Michael and I worked together for 25 years. That's a long time, and I know that Michael would have enjoyed today because he loved a captive audience. And even better, he loved talking about his many ideas and concepts about cities, the importance of urban ecology in shaping the regional landscape, and the imperative of caring for nature's dynamic processes within the city's neglected places. Always the ultimate professor, Michael enjoyed telling how it should be. Nature and society as a functioning whole. Michael definitely was a man on a mission. Michael was trained as an architect and landscape architect and schooled at the École des Beaux-Arts in Geneva, at the Edinburgh College of Art, and finally in the Masters of Landscape Architecture program at the University of Pennsylvania, under the esteemed mentor, Ian McCard. Michael's unique ability to bridge many professional disciplines and break new ground in urban design, site planning, and environmental planning for 50 years was truly remarkable. As an exciting and persuasive ambassador for new movements in urban ecology thinking and city building, he moved through academia and professional practice on his mission. His teaching spread over many years from the University of Toronto to York University, to Harvard, and many international universities as lecturer. Now, in the early years, when I joined Michael's firm in 1976 as a young student on scholarship, I could not have had a better mentor. But I was terrified of him at first. The firm that Michael founded as Michael Hough Associates in 1963 had already evolved into an award-winning design, planning, and ecology practice named Hough Stansbury and Associates. Michael had already initiated the School of Landscape Architecture at the University of Toronto and had designed and built many landmark projects in Toronto. These included the Ontario Courthouse, which today is protected by the Ontario Heritage Act, Philosopher's Walk at University of Toronto, Scarborough College campus, and of course the international award-winning Cultural Park, Ontario Place with Ebb Seidler. Michael's early work fought the traditional stereotype landscape architecture practice, incorporating a fresh environmental approach for reading the landscape and determining how people respond to different places. As a young 20-year-old, I felt so lucky to be working with him. With the participation of Jim Stansbury and Michael Mikowski, the firm broadened its focus, linking science to site planning and design solutions, which was somewhat unheard of in the architectural community at that time. These were exciting days in the office. As teams, we flew all over the country in bush planes and helicopters, and we hiked and we canoed into remote places, analyzing the values of the landscape, either for protection or development. And we conducted park management plans for some of the most spectacular landscapes in Canada. We did tourism strategies, development master plans, resource-based master plans, and they were all led by landscape architects. The office in those days was a real think tank for design and ecological explorations. We worked over drafting tables to the late hours in the morning. We inhaled design marker fumes for presentation drawings for days on end, and partied hearty after a great presentation win. Michael had a way of making every project an adventure, and it was easy to get caught up in the energy vortex that surrounded him. Being truly green in those days was a constant struggle, and Michael was not always popular with certain clients. His unflinching preservation and sometimes lack of diplomacy earned the office the nickname of Huff and Puff. Sometimes it was used affectionately, and sometimes not. I'll let you to imagine about that. Hal Naylor, Ian Dance, David Linster, and I were all very much entrenched in a monumental corporate transition, and our careers were built upon the design testing and explorations of Michael's evolving ideology about the importance of an urban natural landscape, right from design concept to the construction site. Although always a gentleman, Michael was often single-minded, frustrated with business and the client world, and downright crusty at times. When he looked over your shoulder when we were in the studio, you wanted to cringe, as he had a well-known saying when work was unclear or somewhat confused. Humph, he'd say, "That looks like a dog's breakfast." Unfortunately, we lost many employees that way. Patience, real creative talent, and endurance were the key virtues when working with Michael. Through all these professional ups and downs, Bridget was our rock. She knew that Michael did not care about finances and managing a company, and God only knows that we tried to change him. But he was on a mission and to build the ultimate urban landscape theory, and so he did. In 1984, Michael wrote his first book, City Form and Natural Processes, after taking a very long and much-needed research, teaching, and travel break. He was so much happier when he returned from his super sabbatical. He was professionally clear about how to convey the messages of his writing passion, and more determined than ever to build his theories into major new urban renewal assignments. This era of work in the firm was the most influential in the urban environment at a big scale. Michael pursued opportunities with the National Capital Commission in Ottawa. He worked with David Crombie at the Royal Commission on the future of the Toronto waterfront, and worked with local residents, the city, and what was the then MTRCA, the Conservation Authority, on the task force to bring back the Don. His passion for the restoration of the lower Don River corridor and the renewal of many of its special landscapes and heritage sites such as the brickworks, the Portlands, and the mouth of the river was a labor of love for Michael. He encouraged the celebration of ecological processes in degraded places, and he never stopped going back in his life and trying to fine-tune that vision. Working in the nation's capital region with the top designers and planning thinkers in the countries and sometimes in the world was for me the best era of our working relationship together. The National Capital Commission was so supportive of our early research and applied experiments, and believe me, they were experiments, in establishing a low-maintenance landscape in the greenways of Ottawa. The success of these beautiful native mini-forests spread into many other urban design and park planning assignments in Ottawa, Toronto, and later into mega projects in Seoul, Korea, China, and Hong Kong. John Abel, the former director of the National Capital Commission Urban and Design and Planning Division, sent me a wonderful story this week about the first day he arrived in his new job in Ottawa after years as an architect and urban designer in private practice. Madame Jean Pigot, chair of the NCC and a female political dynamo in Ottawa, wanted a new urban sophistication in the city. She came into John's office on the first day on the job. She handed him Michael's first book and bluntly said, "Start here." Now, there were many adventures with Michael. Our stories evolve around what we call the Michael factor. He was so obsessively focused that he was often comically scattered and forgetful, and he was always in a hurry. And all of this really got him into trouble. Jim Stansberry tells a story about working on the new Durham College master plan in the 1960s, where on the way home from a presentation, Michael was so engrossed in talking about his concept ideas that he ran out of gas twice on the 401. The kicker for Jim was that Michael had the gall to make him walk miles to get gas for the ride home. Twice, no less. Another story of Michael's blind determination evolved around his work on the new headquarters for IBM in Markham in more recent years. Michael proposed a whole new green technology approach to site design, inclusive of naturalized planting, low maintenance, water management of proposals, and urban gardens where tomatoes and vegetables could be grown. David and Ian remember how aghast IBM executives were at the thought of growing tomatoes on their newly acquired multi-million-dollar development property. Michael was definitely ahead of his time, because today corporations are looking for healthy, meaningful ways that their employees can contribute to making the landscape around them productive and greener. Back then, though, David and Ian remember painfully that IBM executives thought we were simply out of our minds. Despite Michael's scattered escapades, this endearing, talented man managed to be honored for over 20 awards of excellence, and many will be on display that you'll see later today. He had and received the Conservation Pioneer Award in 2007 for his significant contribution to the conservation movement in Ontario. His favorites were the Lieutenant Governor's Conservation Award in 1993, the American Society of Landscape Architects Bradford Williams Medal in '89 for his journalistic excellence, the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009, and I think Michael's favorite was the Toronto Arts Awards for Architecture and Design in '91 from the Toronto Arts Foundation, because Michael was the only landscape architect to receive an Architecture and Design Award. Of course, there were many awards for the Brickworks and Bring Back the Dawn, and certainly my favorite was the Progressive Architecture Urban Design Award in '87 for the Ottawa Megateam project with other design professionals and greats from Canada for the Confederation Boulevard on Capitol Hill. On a personal note, Michael had tireless energy that was so enviable, and he always had time to help a student, conduct a desk crit, or just chat with a neighbor on a local issue. I am forever grateful for the many lessons that I have drawn from my 25 years working with Michael. Being president of the firm for 15 years was simply a privilege. And I know my sentiments are echoed from our partner team that are here today, from the former Hough, Woodland, Naylor, Dance, Leinster, or Huff and Puff. In closing, Michael built a career of great stature as Canada's most prominent landscape architect and has been a leader for sustainability around the world. His many writings, exquisite sketches, professional drawings, personal papers, and our company materials have been acquired by the Ontario Archives for their great professional significance and are accessible for the general public. On behalf of our partners, landscape architects and environmental planners throughout this country, I do want to say, it is no longer a dog's breakfast, Michael. Our healthy green path for the future is much clearer now because of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you this afternoon. And when Bridget asked me to speak today, she suggested I might focus on Michael's teaching, his books, and his influence on the waterfront, as I'd been involved in all of those aspects of his life and career. I thought back to when I first met Michael. It's about 30 years ago. I was in my late 20s and a rather insecure lecturer at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York. Michael was very supportive and encouraging to me as he showed me the ropes, and I learned so much from teaching with him. We taught a course about ecological approaches to planning and design. Visual images and real experiences were really important to Michael. He emphasized that in his teaching. He loved to get students out into the natural classroom to show them how ecosystems actually work and to expose them to the richness of the forgotten landscapes tucked away in the old industrial parts of the city. Until this week, when I've been in touch with colleagues who knew Michael, and some of you are here this afternoon, I didn't realize just how many career paths were shaped and sometimes even redirected by his courses and his mentorship. Michael had a real talent for explaining his ideas and philosophy in a way that made them tangible and inspired us to incorporate them in our own work. When I was thinking about what to say today, I pulled out all the books and reports in my bookcase that were written by Michael or influenced by him. It was quite an impressive body of work. There's no question that they had a profound effect on the landscape, urban, and environmental professions. His books have influenced countless students and have been translated into several languages, including Chinese, Korean, and Spanish. You can take a look at those after the service. Michael asked me to critique several drafts of his books, and this gave me important insights into the way that he conducted his research, the way he worked on them. He was a voracious explorer of new ideas and searched worldwide for case studies to illustrate how those ideas could be translated into action and what the benefits would be. So in Cities and Natural Process that Carolyn mentioned earlier, he wrote about topics that are mainstream to most of us working in the field today, but were revolutionary at the time. Things like managing stormwater on site, regenerating rivers and wetlands, habitat restoration, and urban agriculture, to name just a few. Out of Place is a well-illustrated book that looks at the tendency for sameness in urban landscapes around the world. But rather than just complain about it, Michael provided constructive principles. Everything began with a set of principles. And examples of ways to enhance rather than to destroy regional identity. And that brings me to the waterfront. When David Crombie, who's here today, hi David, was heading up the Royal Commission on the future of Toronto's waterfront in the late 80s and early 90s, Michael's ideas were exactly what we needed to help implement the ecosystem approach as a way to respond to public concern about the deterioration of this priceless resource. So David invited Michael to contribute a centerpiece essay called Healing an Urban Watershed, the Story of the Don, in Regeneration, which was the final report of the Crombie Commission in 1992. This had a huge influence on the way that people thought about the Don watershed, and in turn about other rivers in the Toronto region, as well as their connections to the waterfront. During our next iteration at the Waterfront Regeneration Trust, we further developed these themes in our Greenway strategy for Lake Ontario. This gave meaning and context to the Waterfront Trail and influenced new approaches to waterfront revitalization all around the lake, from Niagara-on-the-Lake to Belleville. Other documents created by Michael's firm for the waterfront also had significant implications in other places. Restoring natural habitats was one of them, and Carolyn had a big hand in putting that one together. It's a restoration manual that quickly became a university text and a handbook for practitioners and turned out to be one of the Waterfront Regeneration Trust's best-selling books. Another one was Greening the Toronto Portlands, and that addressed the opportunities to use green infrastructure to restore degraded lands. Indeed, these principles have now been incorporated into much of Waterfront Toronto's work over the last decade or so. As a visionary, Michael was a step ahead of his time, but like many visionaries, he was often frustrated. The agencies and the developers just weren't paying attention and doing the right thing. It takes time for new ideas to take root and be implemented, and we often have to make compromises along the way. But when you look at Michael's legacy, as we have an opportunity to do today, there's no doubt that his ideas have transformed many of the environments in and around the city and providing a legacy for the benefit of future generations.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Wilkinson. I first met Michael nearly 40 years ago when I became a faculty member in the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University in 1973. You could now calculate my age. I was in the final stage of completing my PhD thesis at the tender age of 24 and was in a bit of awe when I met him. Michael had already had a distinguished academic career at the University of Toronto, but by then was a partner in the famous firm that you've heard about already. He was a part-time faculty member for many years, and indeed he was a full-time faculty member for 3 years later on. As we got to know each other, we found that we had several common academic interests: urban open space, tourism, and waterfronts. We designed a graduate workshop on urban waterfront development, which attracted enough student interest that it ran for several years. It was a scene of lively debate, visiting speakers, fascinating field trips by Michael to the Toronto waterfront, waterborne tours by sailboat and the Toronto Harbour Commissioner's yacht, presentations by our students, and by us at various conferences, and a conference at Ontario Place on Toronto waterfront. Over the years, we advised many students together at the master's level, and we sat on uncounted oral examinations. In all those settings, Michael was an exceptional teacher. He was patient, encouraging, constructively critical, and here's a word that this is not planned. The three of us have all used the word gentle. We wrote this independently, but we bounced it off emails back and forth yesterday about 50 times, but he was gentle. In fact, many of the emails that I've received this past week, particularly from my colleagues on the panel on ecological integrity that I'll talk about in a moment, the terms gentleman and gentleman were frequently used to describe Michael. But let's get to the real stuff. The most important thing, never mind all this academic stuff, skiing. I'd done my undergraduate geography thesis on ski resort development in the Collingwood area, and our family cottage was nearby Wasaga Beach. Notice I said summer cottage. Michael and Bridget were members of the Craigley Ski Club, and they invited my wife Jo and me, and later our children, to ski with them as guests at the club. That turned into interesting weekends shoveling the snow to get into our summer cottage, warming up the uninsulated cottage, and this is the part that Bridget wanted me to keep in, and walking through the snow to the outhouse. Luckily, Alex and Laura Murray bought a second home on top of the Niagara Escarpment and invited us all to spend warmer weekends with them skiing, eating good food, drinking wine, laughing through raucous discussions. I still remember the night about James Beard celebrating his life, and viewing slides taken on our various world travels. The slides always had an immediate impact on my wife, Jo. She'd just simply fall asleep. Laura and Bridget took a different tack. They just said goodnight, went to bed. So that left Michael and Alex and I. Michael would then give us his views on his slides on such fascinating topics as cast iron bollards on the waterfront wharves of Cape Town, South Africa. There were 50 different kinds of bollards in Cape Town. Did you know that? Are you going to show any of those shots tonight? I don't know. In September 1998, Michael and Bridget were to come to dinner at our house, but Michael had a flu, and only Bridget came. I was carving a roast chicken at the dinner table when Bridget casually mentioned that Michael was going to be busy for the next year or so because he was going to visit many national parks in Canada. Carving chicken nearly went across the table. It turned out that, unbeknownst to us, we had each been appointed by the Honourable Sheila Copps, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, to be members of the 11-person panel on the ecological integrity of Canada's national parks. So Michael and I spent much of the next 18 months traveling with the panel. We visited 9 parks across Canada, from Pacific Rim to Wood Buffalo to St. Lawrence Islands to Gross Morin and others in between. We toured in helicopters, float planes, Zodiacs, boats, ATVs, trucks, cars, and often on foot. We met with parks employees, First Nations and Métis representatives, local stakeholders, NGOs, Resource Development Association, parks users, and many others. I think the total was about 2,000 people that we talked to in that period of time. We had some amazing experiences. We sat out on a damp picnic table at night watching the Aurora Borealis over Gross Morin. We danced the chicken dance. This is true. We danced the chicken dance at the Longhouse at Oxquiscosity First Nation. Unfortunately, there are no slides of that experience. We ate ostrich in a community center outside Riding Mountain. It was locavore food. They grew it locally. We flew in a helicopter looking for bison and wood buffalo. We were invited to Métis National Day in Fort Smith in Northwest Territories and ate barbecued caribou. We met on several occasions with local people who wanted to vent against Parks Canada, and we listened patiently. We spent countless hours in conference rooms and seminar rooms listening and asking questions, and then collectively writing a 200-page report with 127 recommendations. And we are still friends today, believe it or not, 19 people. Finally, Minister Copps released our report in March 2000 and said she would implement all of our recommendations if legally and financially possible. We did have an impact that was far-ranging, and we were successful until the Harper government came along. And I'm not going to go there now. 10 years later, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society awarded the members of the panel the J.B. Harkin Award for Conservation. J.B. Harkin was the first commissioner of what was then called the Dominion Parks, for our contribution to conservation, the first time that a group had ever received that award. And unfortunately, Michael wasn't able to travel to Calgary with us to receive the award. You learn a lot about someone when you spend so much time with them in a variety of unusual places. And I can sum it all up by these words that the 3 of us so far have used: gentleman and gentleman. He'll be missed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Simon Miles, public policy consultant, who had the very good fortune to meet Michael. I was guessing that it was 1964, but let's say the mid-60s. It's so long ago, but I was still in my formative years. We all have our favorite places that Michael created. And before getting into yet another take on Michael's life, let me say that both Annie and I, long before we met, were getting tremendous pleasure from such spaces as Philosophers Walk, and I'm sure you all feel the same. There are a number of magical spaces in Toronto, and Michael was responsible for a good number of them, and that's a wonderful legacy in itself. Michael was a very serious, driven chap, and that's obviously come out from what the others were saying. I found him so interesting precisely because one could have such profound conversations with him. But yes, he could be very funny, even though maybe he was not intending to be. And one of my favourite stories, and I suspect from having talked to others here just before coming up here, I should say our favourite stories, is about Michael when he had been asked to meet Prince Charles at the Art Gallery of Ontario. This was no ordinary meeting of the sort where you just get to be in the same room as Prince Charles. No, this was for you to meet him, because you, Michael Hough, unknown to you at the time maybe, would be asked to show the Prince around the Don Valley later in his stay. Indeed, that tour, I believe, Tim, is shown in a slide thing that you're going to be doing later. Well, it seems that Michael, lost in thought, was beavering away at his office and only realised when it was far too close to the anointed hour that, like the Mad Hatter, he was very, very late for a very important date. So Michael, here he is in a hurry as he's making his way in his red, sporty Honda to the art gallery. Parenthetically, it should be said, I think, that he and Bridget had obviously been searching for eternal youth when they purchased this little red machine. He happened to be zooming along the Gardiner at one of those bits where it's really quite high off the ground, and suddenly he gets sideswiped by a ginormous truck. While the angels were short on eternal youth, they were prepared to give him the thrill of his life. Up he goes over the railing and is suspended there until the tow truck arrives. Now, I think that you'll agree that if you had gone through that, you would call it a day. But Michael was a monarchist and extremely polite, and so he was not going to let Charles down. And the tow truck driver, as you can imagine, was rather impressed that his newfound client was going to meet a prince. So off they set. Car in tow, complete total wreck, to the art gallery. At the front steps of the gallery, as you can imagine it, the police and royal handlers were ready to greet our distinguished guests. Limousines were the order of the day. Tow trucks were not. And anyway, Michael obviously saw that he was in a bit of a fix here, so he just decided to make a dash for it, straightening out his hair as he dashed up the steps. He made it just in time to shake Charles's hand as he got to that point in the line where Michael was meant to be, and able to assure the prince that, yes, he's just fine, thanks. And on the Saturday, he accompanied Charles as his personal guide on that visit to the Don Valley to recognise the work of bringing back the Don, for which Michael was such a major inspiration, and to which Karen has already referred, and I think Suzanne too. Indeed, there were a number of non-profit groups that have benefited enormously from Michael's contributions. In the 1980s, I was the volunteer president of the Conservation Council of Ontario. Michael had already done a superb job in 1971 of providing them with a guide called The Urban Landscape. He decided it was time for a major update, and he and Suzanne produced People and City Landscapes, which was a study of people and open space in metropolitan, or at least, let's say, large cities in Ontario. It was typically Michael. It looked at the changing societal context within which open space had to be managed, and elaborated a number of guiding principles that, if followed, would enable all members of society to do a lot more to make a much better use of open spaces, from parks to back alleys. His efforts to articulate guiding principles, as Suzanne has already elaborated, made his work so valuable for international audiences. I recall a World Bank project. We were rewriting a guide for the assessment of environmental impacts of major highway projects, and we had a chapter on assessing the impacts of highways on aesthetics and landscapes. Very good, you say, but actually it's very tricky. Michael came to our rescue. Principles enunciated in his book, Out of Place, gave us the needed framework. That document, like so many to which Michael contributed, has been used worldwide. His legacy will be felt everywhere. Now, there's one other legacy that he is leaving, and that will be the children that he and Bridget moulded. Well, tried to mould. Early in his life, these young'uns had decided that they were not going to be outdone by their parents. Indeed, Fiona gave me a confirmation of that just yesterday. Witness, for example, the opening of Ontario Place. Michael and Eb Zeidler were its two main creators. On opening day, however, it was not Michael and Eb that were to receive the plaudits. It was 10-year-old Adrian, well, he was 10 once, who decided to approach Premier Davis. Hello, Mr. Premier, I'm Adrian Hough. My daddy designed this place. Well, Adrian, I guess you have to start young if you want a BAFTA, right? Tim, you should know that he's been nominated for a BAFTA. Very impressive. Tim took up the palette and brush that Michael loved, and Fiona has an ecologist's dream job. Michael and Bridget will live on for many years. Thank you.